I'm Vincent, 28 male. I live in a city where the price of a shoebox apartment could fund a small nation, and my job as an urban planner gives me a front row seat to the housing crisis I'm personally experiencing. For years, I was proud of my independence, of the small but tidy apartment I called my own, even if it meant half my salary vanished on the first of every month. I was making it work just like everyone else. This story is about how a well-intentioned offer from my family to help me get ahead turned into the most profound betrayal of my life, forcing me to use the very skills from my career to dismantle the trap they had built around me. It's about the moment I realized I wasn't their son. I was their solution. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The idea was planted during a Sunday dinner, the kind my mother, Alina, insisted on every week. These gatherings were a staple of my adult life, a comforting ritual of roasted chicken and passive-aggressive inquiries about my love life and career trajectory. My father, Arthur, a man who viewed life through the lens of a bank ledger even years into his retirement, would always steer the conversation toward finances. That particular evening, he seemed especially concerned. Vincent, he began, placing his fork down with a deliberate click that signaled a serious topic was imminent. Your mother and I were looking at the rental market reports. It's criminal what they're charging for a one-bedroom these days. How are you managing? I gave him the standard, non-committal answer. It's tough, but I'm getting by. My salary is decent and I'm good at budgeting. This was only partially true. I was getting by, but it was a tightrope walk over a financial abyss. Student loans, car payments, and the astronomical rent meant my savings account was more of a temporary holding pen for cash than a growing nest egg. My dream of one day owning property in the city I was helping to plan seemed like a cruel joke. Alina, a retired schoolteacher with an expert-level ability to sense emotional vulnerability, chimed in, her voice thick with practiced sympathy. We just worry, dear. We see you working so hard, and for what? To make some landlord rich, you're barely treading water. My younger brother, Leo, looked up from his phone for the first time all evening. At 26, Leo was the family's resident aspiring musician, a title that had been his primary occupation since he dropped out of college. He still lived at home, occupying his childhood bedroom, which had slowly transformed into a makeshift recording studio. He smirked. Yeah, Vin, you should see the gear I could buy with what you pay in rent for a year. I shot him a look, but my parents just chuckled, as if his complete lack of financial contribution was a charming quirk. This was the family dynamic in a nutshell. I was the responsible, independent son who was always a little bit struggling, and he was the carefree creative genius whose potential was a long-term investment. It's when Arthur dropped the proposal. We want you to move back home, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The basement is practically a self-contained apartment. We renovated it a few years ago. It has its own entrance, a small kitchen, a full bathroom. You'd have your privacy. I was taken aback. Move home at 28, the thought felt like a significant step backward. I had been on my own since I was 19. I don't know, Dad, I started. I appreciate the offer, but... Alina cut me off, her eyes wide and earnest. Think of the money you'd save, Vincent. You could pay off your student loans in a couple of years. You could start saving for a down payment. This isn't about you failing. It's about us giving you a strategic advantage. It's what families do for each other. The way she framed it was intoxicatingly sensible. A strategic advantage. It wasn't regression. It was a smart financial maneuver. Arthur nodded in agreement. We wouldn't let you live here for free, of course. That's not responsible. We'll charge you rent, but it will be a fraction of what you're paying now. A family discount. Just enough to cover your share of the utilities, property tax, and groceries. It's the fair way to do it. The idea began to take root. The thought of an extra $1,000, maybe $1,500 in my bank account each month was dizzying. I could finally get ahead. I could see a future where I wasn't just surviving. They painted a beautiful picture of family support, of a temporary sacrifice for a massive long-term gain. Leo even offered a rare word of encouragement. It's not so bad, he said. Mom still does all the laundry. Over the next week, they pressed their case. My mother sent me links to articles about the boomerang generation and Smart. It was for young adults to live with their parents to save money. My father drew up a hypothetical budget showing my potential savings, a document so compelling it could have convinced a monk to invest in the stock market. My own apartment suddenly felt different. The freedom it represented now seemed overshadowed by the financial burden it imposed. Every squeak of the floorboards sounded like a dollar bill being ripped in half. My resolve crumbled under the weight of their relentless logic and the allure of financial stability. I finally agreed. Okay, I told them over the phone. I'll do it. The relief in their voices was palpable. They were thrilled, not just for me, they said, but because they would love having me home again. We decided I would move in at the end of the month. The day before I moved, Arthur sat me down at the dining room table to formalize the arrangement, as he put it. He had a printed document that looked surprisingly official. Now for the rent, he said, sliding the paper towards me. Your current rent is $2,200. The market rate for a basement suite like ours, even for family, would be around $1,600, but we want to give you a real leg up, so we'll make it an even $1,200 a month. All inclusive. I did a quick mental calculation. $1,200 was $1,000 less than what I was paying. It was more than I expected them to charge, but his justification seemed sound. Property taxes were high and groceries for another adult wouldn't be cheap. It's a very fair price, son, he said, his voice imbued with paternal authority. This covers everything. Your food, your internet, your electricity, everything. You won't have to worry about a single bill. Just transfer the $1,200 to my account on the first of each month. I looked at the document. It wasn't a lease, just a simple family residency agreement he'd typed up. It felt a little clinical for family, but I chalked it up to my dad's background as a bank manager. He liked things neat and tidy. Okay, Dad, that sounds fair, I said, a wave of gratitude washing over me. Thank you, really, this is going to change everything for me. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. We're your parents, Vincent. We're happy to help. I moved my boxes into the basement the next day, feeling a sense of optimism I hadn't felt in years. The suite was nice, spacious, and clean. It felt like I had made the smartest decision of my life. I was home. I was saving money. I was on the path to a better future, all thanks to my loving, supportive family. The first month was a honeymoon period. The relief of sending a rent payment that was $1,000 lighter than usual was exhilarating. I immediately redirected that extra cash to my highest interest student loan, watching the principal balance actually shrink for a change. My mother made a big deal of my return, cooking my favorite meals and asking about my day with a level of interest she hadn't shown since I was in high school. My father would nod approvingly when I mentioned my aggressive debt repayment strategy. Even Leo seemed mildly pleased to have me around, occasionally drifting downstairs to show me a new song he was working on or to borrow $20, which he never paid back. I wrote it off as the cost of brotherhood. The illusion, however, began to fray around the edges by the second month. The all-inclusive arrangement started to reveal its hidden clauses. When I did my own grocery shopping for some specific items I liked, a certain brand of coffee, some protein bars for work, my mother would comment on it. "Oh, Vincent, you don't need to buy your own things. Your rent covers your food." It sounded generous, but it felt like a gentle reprimand, a reminder that I was living under her roof and her rules. I noticed that while my general food needs were met, the fridge was always stocked with Leo's preferred expensive organic juices and gluten-free snacks. If I drank one, it would be the subject of a passive-aggressive comment later. "I was saving that for Leo," she'd say with a tight smile. "His system is more sensitive." My father's financial oversight also intensified. He'd casually ask what I was doing with the money I was saving. When I mentioned I'd gone out for dinner with friends, he'd raise an eyebrow. "Be careful, son. The whole point of this is to be disciplined. Eating out is how your generation throws money away." It felt less like fatherly advice and more like an audit from my new landlord. I was a 28-year-old man with a professional career, and I was being lectured about buying a burrito. The privacy I was promised also felt conditional. My mother would often use her key to the main house door that connected to my basement suite, entering without knocking to drop off my clean laundry, which was a kind gesture that also served as an unspoken inspection of my living space. "Just making sure you're keeping things tid." "Why down here?" she'd say, her eyes scanning every corner. Meanwhile, Leo's lifestyle seemed to be flourishing. For someone with no discernible income, he was never short on cash. He bought a new, expensive synthesizer, claiming he found an unbelievable deal online. He was always going out to concerts and bars with his friends, often rolling in late at night, loud enough to wake me in the basement. I started to wonder where the money was coming from. When I cautiously asked him about it, he just shrugged. "You know, odd jobs. A little help from mom and dad. They support my art." That phrase, "support my art," seemed to be a catch-all justification for his perpetual dependency. The resentment began to build, a slow, simmering heat in my chest. I felt a growing cognitive dissonance. On one hand, I was saving a significant amount of money. The numbers on my loan statements were going down. This was objectively a good financial move. But on the other hand, the cost to my autonomy and self-respect felt increasingly steep. I was no longer a guest in my parents' home. I was a subordinate. My role in the family had shifted. I wasn't just Vincent, the son. I was Vincent, the in-house ATM who also happened to be related to them. One evening, the situation came to a head over something trivial. My friend Maya was having a small get-together, and I offered to bring a nice bottle of wine. I bought one for about $30 on my way home from work. As I was setting it on the kitchen counter before heading out, my father saw it. $30, he scoffed, picking it up to inspect the label. What a waste. Do you know how much of your student loan you could pay off with $30? I snapped. Dad, it's one bottle of wine. I work hard. I'm saving over $1,000 a month thanks to being here. Can't I spend $30 without being interrogated? His face hardened. It's about the principle, Vincent. It's my house and I'm giving you an incredible opportunity. I expect you to be responsible with it. Don't be ungrateful. The word ungrateful struck a nerve. I was paying them $1,200 a month. That wasn't a small amount of money. It was more than enough to cover my share of the household expenses, and I suspected it was probably more than enough. I was grateful for the initial offer, but this constant scrutiny felt like a breach of our agreement. I felt like a child again, my every decision subject to his approval. Alina rushed in, sensing the tension. Now, Arthur, don't be so hard on him. He's a good boy. She turned to me. But your father has a point, dear. We just want what's best for you. Her role as the gentle mediator only made it worse. They were a united front. I left for the party feeling angry and humiliated. Maya, who had known me since college, could tell something was wrong. Is everything okay with the home front? She asked as I told her the story. It sounds less like they're helping you and more like they're controlling you. I sighed, swirling the expensive wine in my glass. I know, but what can I do? The money I'm saving is life-changing. I just have to stick it out for another year or two. Just be careful, Vincent, she said, her expression serious. Deals that seem too good to be true often are. Her words lingered in my mind long after I went home that night. I unlocked the basement door, stepping into the quiet, sterile space that was supposed to be my sanctuary, my launchpad to a better future. But it no longer felt like a safe harbor. It felt like a cage, one I was paying a very high price to live in. The numbers in my bank account were going up, but my sense of self was plummeting. The turning point, the moment the simmering resentment boiled over into cold, horrifying clarity, arrived on a quiet Saturday afternoon about 6 months into my stay. It was early April, and my father had commandeered the dining room table, covering its polished surface with a chaotic blizzard of receipts, tax forms, and official-looking envelopes. Tax season was Arthur's Super Bowl. As a former bank manager, he approached his personal finances with the meticulous, joyless precision of a bomb disposal expert. I usually made a point to stay out of his way during this time, but I had come upstairs to grab a glass of water. He was hunched over a calculator, muttering about capital gains and deductions. "Don't touch anything," he grumbled without looking up as I passed through. "This is a finely balanced ecosystem of financial documentation." I was about to head back downstairs when the phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression softened. "It's your aunt," he said, pushing his chair back. "I'd better take this in my office. The reception is better." He picked up the cordless phone and walked down the hall, leaving the ecosystem of financial documents unattended. I filled my glass of water at the sink, my eyes idly drifting over the papers on the table. I had no intention of snooping. My father's finances were his business. But as I turned to leave, one document snagged my attention. It was a bank statement peeking out from under a tax worksheet. It wasn't the header that caught my eye, but a single-line item in the transaction history that was clearly visible. The description read, "Recurring e-transfer, Leo monthly allowance." My blood went cold. My eyes darted to the amount next to it, $1,000, $1,000, a perfectly round, shockingly familiar number. It couldn't be a coincidence. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and a desperate need to know more. My father was still talking down the hall, his voice a low murmur. I had to be quick. My hands trembled slightly as I carefully slid the statement out from under the other papers. It was a joint checking account under my parents' names, Alina and Arthur. I scanned the transaction list for the previous month. There it was again, March 1st. Online transfer from Vincent, plus $1,200, my rent payment, and right below it on March 2nd, the corresponding debit. Recurring e-transfer, Leo monthly allowance, $1,000,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was all there in stark black and white. My carefully budgeted, hard-earned money wasn't going toward property taxes or utilities or groceries. It was being funneled directly to my unemployed brother. They were taking my rent and using it to pay him a salary. The remaining $200 was, I presumed, my actual contribution to the household expenses, if that. The sick realization washed over me in waves of nausea and fury. Every lecture about financial responsibility, every condescending comment about my spending, every guilt trip about being ungrateful was a lie. They weren't helping me get ahead. They were using me. I was a pass-through entity. My financial struggle was the solution to their problem, how to fund their coddled younger son's directionless life without it coming out of their own retirement savings. My hands were shaking now, but my mind was eerily calm, the shock giving way to a chilling focus. I heard my father laugh at something my aunt said. He'd be off the phone soon. I needed proof. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the camera app. I laid the bank statement flat on the table, making sure the key transactions were in frame, the deposit from my account, the withdrawal for Leo's allowance. The date, the account holder names, I took a photo, then another just to be sure. I zoomed in on the first photo to ensure it was clear. It was perfect. Indisputable. I slid the statement back exactly where I found it, the corner tucked just so under the tax form. I retreated to the kitchen, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I stood at the sink, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to process the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, it was the deception, the manipulation. My parents, the two people who were supposed to be my staunchest supporters, had looked me in the eye and constructed an elaborate fiction, casting me in the role of the struggling son they were generously helping, when in reality I was the unwitting benefactor in the Support Leo's Art Foundation. My brother wasn't just getting a little help, I was his primary source of income. His new synthesizer, his nights out with friends, I had paid for all of it. My father walked back into the room, ending his call. "She talks my ear off," he said cheerfully, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just been shattered on his dining room table. He sat down and picked up his calculator. I couldn't look at him. "Everything okay, son? You look a little pale," he asked, a hint of his usual dismissive concern in his voice. I forced myself to sound normal. "Yeah, fine, just a headache. I'm going to go lie down." I walked away without another word, descending the stairs to my basement prison. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the photo of the bank statement burning a hole in my phone's memory. The feeling of betrayal was so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The family discount wasn't a discount at all. It was the price of my own deception, and I had been paying it faithfully every single month. The trust I had in my family, the very foundation of my relationship with them, had been obliterated in the space of 30 seconds by a single misplaced piece of paper. For 2 days I was paralyzed by the discovery. I moved through the house like a ghost, eating meals in silence, offering one-word answers and retreating to the basement. The anger and hurt were so immense that I couldn't think straight. Every interaction with my family was now tainted. My mother's concerned questions felt like a performance. My father's financial advice felt like a twisted joke. My brother's lazy, entitled presence was a constant, infuriating reminder of WH. Ere my money was going, a part of me wanted to storm upstairs, throw my phone on the table, and watch their faces as I exposed their lie. But I knew how it would play out. They would gaslight me. My mother would cry, my father would get angry and call me ungrateful, and they would reframe the narrative until they were the victims and I was the villain for violating their privacy. They would say it was all family money anyway and that I was being selfish. I would get a hollow, unsatisfying argument and nothing would change. I needed leverage. I needed something they couldn't argue their way out of, something that would strip them of all their self-righteous authority. My mind raced, searching for a path forward, and that's when my professional life and my personal crisis collided. I'm an urban planner. My job is to understand the intricate, often tedious rules that govern how a city functions. I deal with zoning ordinances, building codes, permits, and land use regulations every single day. I literally plan the spaces where people live, and I was living in a renovated basement. The thought hit me like a lightning bolt. Was this space even legal? Most cities have strict regulations about secondary dwelling units, often called in-law suites or basement apartments. You can't just throw a stove and a toilet into a basement and call it an apartment. There are requirements for ceiling height, window size for fire egress, separate electrical panels, fire separation between units, and most importantly, permits. You need official permission from the city to create a second home within a single-family dwelling. My parents were meticulous about many things, but they also had a tendency to cut corners to save money. My father, a retired electrician, had likely done most of the renovation work himself. Did he go through the proper channels? I seriously doubted it. The next morning, my paralysis was replaced by a cold, methodical purpose. I went to work with a new mission. During my lunch break, I logged into the city's public planning database, a system I navigated daily. I started with my parents' address. I pulled up the property file, looking for any permits issued in the last 10 years when they had told me the renovation took place. There were permits for a new roof in 2018 and a deck repair in 2021. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing, for a basement renovation. Electrical work for a new kitchen, plumbing for a new bathroom, or a change of use to create a secondary dwelling unit. A grim smile touched my lips. This was a good start. The absence of a permit was a huge red flag. Next, I delved into the municipal zoning code. Their property was zoned R1, which meant single-family residential. While our city did allow secondary suites in R1 zones to increase housing density, they were subject to a long list of specific requirements. I downloaded the relevant bylaw and read through it line by line. Requirement 1, minimum ceiling height of 6 feet 5 inches. I made a mental note to measure my ceiling when I got home. It always felt a little low. Requirement 2, egress windows in all sleeping areas. The window in my basement bedroom was tiny, high on the wall. I was almost certain it wasn't large enough for a person to climb through in an emergency. This was a major life safety violation. Requirement 3, a separate, independent heating and ventilation system. I knew for a fact that my heating came from the main house furnace, the vents crudely tapped into the main ductwork. Requirement 4, proper fire separation, including fire-rated drywall on the ceiling and walls between the two units. I could hear my father's footsteps above me every morning. The separation was standard drywall at best. The list went on and on. With each requirement I read, I grew more certain that my apartment was a completely illegal, unpermitted fire trap. To confirm my suspicions, I needed a little help. I called my friend Maya. Besides being a close friend, she worked as a clerk at the City Hall's planning department. She was the one who could access the deeper, non-public notes in the system. "Hey Maya, I have a weird question," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm doing some research on secondary suites for a work project. Can you look up an address for me and tell me if it's ever been registered as a two-unit dwelling?" I gave her the address. She was quiet for a minute as she typed. "Nope," she said finally. "It's registered as a single-family dwelling. No suites, no apartments, never has been. Why is this about your parents' place?" I hesitated, then decided to trust her. "Maya, it is, and I think I'm living in an illegal unit, and there's a lot more to the story." I gave her the short, infuriating version: the rent, the brother, the bank statement. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, Vincent," she said, her voice a mix of shock and anger on my behalf, "that is awful, your own parents." Then, her tone shifted, becoming professional and sharp. "Okay, if what you're saying is true, they are in so much trouble. They're acting as landlords for an illegal property. They're violating zoning bylaws, building codes, and fire codes. The fines for that are massive, and if they've been claiming that rental income, well, that's a whole other can of worms." She had just given me the word I was looking for: landlords. That's what they were, not my parents, not my loving family. In this context, they were my landlords, and I was their tenant. That legal distinction changed everything. I wasn't a son throwing a tantrum. I was a tenant with rights, living in an unsafe, illegal dwelling that was being rented to me under false pretenses. That evening, I went home with a tape measure. The ceiling height was 6 feet 4 inches, 1 inch too short. The bedroom window was 15 inches wide. The minimum for egress was 20 inches, violation after violation. I took photos of everything: the window, the shared vents, the consumer-grade smoke detector instead of an interlinked system. My career in urban planning had ironically given me the perfect toolkit for my revenge. I wasn't just going to confront them, I was going to build a case. A meticulous, undeniable, professional-grade case against my own family. With a folder on my laptop now filled with damning evidence: the photo of the bank statement, screenshots of the city's permit database, a PDF of the zoning bylaw with highlighted violations, and pictures of every code infraction in the basement, the rage began to subside, replaced by a feeling of immense power. They thought they were in control, that I was the child living under their roof, dependent on their generosity. They had no idea that I now held all the cards. But power is useless without a strategy. I didn't want a messy, protracted family war. I didn't want to actually see them buried in municipal fines, as satisfying as that might sound. The goal wasn't to destroy them, it was to extricate myself from their web of deceit and reclaim what was mine, both my money and my dignity. My plan had 3 phases: secure my future, formalize my case, and execute the confrontation. Phase 1 was the most critical: secure my future. I couldn't make a single move until I had a new place to live. The last thing I wanted was to win the argument only to end up homeless. I started apartment hunting with a singular focus. My budget was now based on my full salary, not the artificially inflated savings from my parents' scheme. I could afford my own place again, and this time I would be paying my own way, beholden to no one. I spent every evening after work scrolling through listings and every weekend attending viewings. It was exhausting, but it was also liberating. Each apartment I saw was a vision of my future independence. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, I found it: a 1-bedroom apartment in a newer building closer to my work. It was clean, bright, and most importantly, it was all mine. I filled out the application, submitted my financial documents, and within a few days I was approved. I signed the lease, my hand steady as I penned my name. The move-in date was in 3 weeks. The clock was now officially ticking. Phase 2 was formalizing my case. I couldn't just walk in and start yelling about bylaws. I needed to present my findings in a way that was calm, irrefutable, and left no room for emotional manipulation. This had to be handled like a legal matter, not a family squabble. I sat down and wrote a letter. It took me 3 drafts to get the tone exactly right: not angry, not emotional, just factual and firm. I addressed it to Arthur and Alina, my landlords. I began by stating the facts of our rental agreement, the monthly payment of $1,200, which began on a specific date. Then, I methodically laid out my discoveries. First, the financial deception. I wrote, "It has come to my attention that these payments were not used for household expenses as agreed, but were instead being transferred directly to Leo as a monthly allowance." I attached a printed, high-quality copy of the photo I took of their bank statement. I labeled it Exhibit A. Second, the illegal rental unit. I wrote, "Furthermore, my professional assessment as an urban planner has confirmed that the basement unit I have been renting does not comply with municipal and provincial regulations for a secondary dwelling unit." I then created a bulleted list of the specific violations, citing the exact bylaw codes I had researched. Zoning Bylaw 47B, Section 321, Failure to obtain a permit for change of use. Building Code Article 9521, Ceiling height below the minimum requirement of 65. Fire Code Article 2134, Non-compliant egress window in the sleeping area. Fire Code Article 2142, Lack of proper fire separation between dwelling units. I included my own clear annotated photos as Exhibit B. Finally, I came to my terms, was the crucial part. I didn't demand an apology or an admission of guilt. I knew I'd never get a sincere one. I focused on a clean break and restitution. Given the fraudulent nature of this rental agreement and the illegal and unsafe condition of the dwelling, I wrote, I will be vacating the premises on my move-in date. In lieu of reporting these violations to the Municipal Planning and Enforcement Department and the Electrical Safety Authority, which would result in significant fines and a legal order to decommission the unit, I require a full and immediate refund of all rent paid. I calculated the total. 8 months at $1,200 a month came to $9,600. I concluded the letter by stating that I expected the full amount to be transferred to my account within 24 hours of receiving this letter. If the deadline was missed, I would proceed with filing official complaints with all relevant authorities the following morning. I printed 3 copies of the entire package, the letter, Exhibit A, and Exhibit B. I placed each one in a crisp manila envelope. One for Arthur, one for Alina, and one for Leo. He wasn't a landlord, but he was a party to the deception, and he needed to understand the consequences. Phase 3 was planning the execution. The confrontation had to be on my terms in a controlled environment. A family dinner was the perfect setting. It was their home turf, which would make them feel comfortable and unsuspecting. I chose the upcoming Sunday. I would behave normally all week, giving no indication that anything was amiss. I would endure my mother's fussing and my father's lectures one last time. When the moment came, I would not raise my voice. I would be calm, professional, and unmovable. This was not a son confronting his parents. This was a planner presenting his findings. I spent the next week quietly packing. I bought boxes and began discreetly filling them with books, clothes, and personal items, stashing them in the back of my closet. Every box I packed felt like a brick being laid in the foundation of my new life. The plan was in place. My exit was secured. The letters were sealed. All that was left was to deliver them. The final Sunday dinner felt surreal. I sat at the same table where the idea of me moving home had been born, a plan pitched as my salvation. I played my part, discussing a project at work, passing the mashed potatoes, and ignoring Leo's monologue about how mainstream music had lost its soul. My mother seemed happy, commenting on how wonderful it was to have everyone together. My father, having finished his taxes, was in a relaxed mood, holding forth on the state of the economy. They had no idea they were sitting across from a man who was about to detonate a precisely engineered bomb in the middle of their comfortable, deceitful lives. My heart was surprisingly calm. The anger had been forged into something harder, cooler, resolve. When the meal was over and my mother was about to clear the plates, I held up a hand. "Can everyone wait just a moment? There's something I need to discuss." The casual, friendly atmosphere immediately evaporated. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. My father's expression soured slightly, likely anticipating a request for money or some other inconvenience. My mother looked curious. Leo just looked bored. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the 3 manila envelopes. I placed them on the table, sliding one in front of each of them. "I've prepared some documents for you to review," I said, my voice even and steady. Arthur picked his up, frowning at the formality of it. "What is this, Vincent? More of your work projects?" "In a way," I replied. "Please open it." He tore it open impatiently, while Alina opened hers with a more delicate touch. Leo, with a sigh, followed suit. Silence descended on the room, punctuated only by the rustling of paper. I watched their faces, a fascinating study in sequential emotional breakdown. My father's eyes scanned the first page of the letter. His initial frown of confusion deepened into a dark scowl as he registered the words fraudulent, illegal, and restitution. His gaze flickered to the attached bank statement. Exhibit A. I saw the moment of recognition, the dawning horror that his carelessness had exposed him. His face, usually ruddy and confident, turned a pale, sickly gray. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly agape, a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. My mother read more slowly. Her hand went to her chest when she saw the bank statement. A soft gasp escaped her lips. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes filling with tears, but these weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of someone who had been caught. The performance was already beginning. "Vincent, how could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Spying on us." "You left it on the dining room table," I said calmly, refusing to take the bait. "Please keep rating." Leo was the last to process it. He stared at the bank statement, his face a blank slate of confusion. Then he looked at the amount $1000 and the description Leo monthly allowance, and a flicker of understanding crossed his features. He looked at me, then at our parents, as if waiting for them to deny it. When they didn't, his expression shifted to one of sullen resentment, as if I had just ruined the best gig he ever had. Arthur was the first to speak, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You have no right," he began, throwing the papers on the table. "This is a family matter. The money in this house is family money. We were helping you and we were helping your brother. It's called balance." "It's called fraud, Dad," I corrected him, my voice unwavering. "You told me the money was for household expenses. That was a lie. You used me as an income source to fund Leo's lifestyle. But that's only the first part of the problem. Please turn to Exhibit B." He snatched the pages, his eyes blazing with fury as he saw the photos of the basement, the annotated bylaw codes. This was my territory. His expertise was in ledgers and interest rates. Mine was in municipal code and zoning enforcement. His face fell as he read my analysis. The bluster began to fade, replaced by a dawning, terrifying comprehension. He, the meticulous ex-banker, had made a colossal, amateur mistake. "The fines for an illegal secondary unit start at $25,000, I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Plus the cost of removing the kitchen and returning the space to its original state, all under the supervision of a city inspector. Of course, that's before they look into the unpermitted electrical and plumbing work." Alina began to sob openly now. "We did it for you, we did it for your brother, we're a family." "A family doesn't build their support for one child on the deception of another," I said, looking her directly in the eye. "You weren't supporting Leo, you were enabling him and you made me pay for it. You weren't helping me, you were using me as a landlord and a slumlord at that, given the safety violations." Leo finally spoke, his voice petulant. "So what? It's not a big deal. You were saving money anyway." "It is a big deal, Leo," I shot back. "While you were buying new music gear with my rent, I was sleeping in a room with a window I couldn't escape through in a fire." That silenced them all. The reality of the safety issue, the one thing they couldn't reframe, hung in the air. Arthur stared at the papers, his mind the mind of a banker, no doubt calculating the potential financial devastation. The fines, the construction costs, the hit to their property value. I had them all. "My terms are on the last page," I said into the thick silence. "You have 24 hours to transfer the $9,600 back into my account. If you do, this all goes away. I will move out on the 30th and you will never hear from me or the city about it again. If you don't, I will be at City Hall first thing Tuesday morning to file a formal complaint." I stood up from the table. "I believe I've made myself clear. I'll be in my room, or rather the illegal dwelling unit, if you have any questions about the transfer process." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them amidst the wreckage of their own creation, the certified letters of their eviction from my life sitting on the dinner table. The silence that followed my departure from the dining room was the most profound I had ever heard in that house. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shame and defeat. I went down to the basement, closed the door, and began the final phase of my packing, my movements calm and deliberate. I didn't feel triumphant or gleeful. I just felt a vast, echoing sense of release. I had stood up for myself, not with rage, but with facts. I had used my knowledge not just to protect myself, but to reclaim what was mine. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my banking app. E-transfer received $9,600. The sender was my father. There was no message in the memo line, just the cold, hard cash. They had folded. The pragmatist in my father had overruled the prideful patriarch. He knew better than anyone that I had them cornered. Fighting me would be financially catastrophic, and the public shame of a city order posted on their front door would be unbearable for people so concerned with appearances. They paid the ransom to make the problem disappear. The next 10 days were a masterclass in passive aggression and avoidance. No one spoke to me. If I entered a room, they would find a reason to leave. My mother stopped cooking for me, leaving my portion of any meal pointedly unmade. My father would retreat to his office or the garage whenever I was near. Leo locked himself in his room, the muffled sound of his guitar the only evidence he still existed. They were treating me like a traitor, the ungrateful child who had broken the unspoken family code, but their silent treatment was a gift. It freed me from any lingering guilt or doubt. Their refusal to apologize, to even acknowledge the gravity of their deception, affirmed that I had made the only possible choice. They weren't sorry for what they did, they were sorry they got caught. I rented a moving truck for the final day. My friend Maya came to help. As we carried boxes out of the basement's separate entrance, I never once saw my family. They stayed hidden inside the main house, invisible landlords of a condemned property. Maya was a whirlwind of cheerful efficiency, a stark contrast to the oppressive gloom emanating from the house. "I can't believe they haven't even shown their faces," she said, hefting a box of books. "Cowards." "It's better this way," I replied, and I meant it. A tearful, dramatic confrontation would have been exhausting. This Cold War was clean, it was a business transaction, and our business was concluded. As we loaded the last box onto the truck, I paused in the driveway. I looked at the house where I grew up, the place that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. It no longer held any emotional power over me. It was just a building, a property with zoning violations. I left the key to the basement on the small patio table near the entrance, placed under a rock. I didn't need to go inside to say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. Driving away, I didn't look back. An hour later, Maya and I were unloading my things into my new apartment. The building was quiet and modern, and the air smelled of fresh paint. My unit was on the 7th floor with a large window that looked out over the city skyline. It was smaller than the basement suite, but it was mine in a way that place had never been. It was legal, it was safe, and it was honest. After the last box was inside, Maya gave me a hug. "Welcome home, Vincent," she said. "For real this time." That night after she left, I sat on the floor of my empty living room, eating pizza out of a cardboard box. The silence was different here. It wasn't the heavy, accusatory silence of my parents' house. It was a light, peaceful silence filled with potential. It was the sound of a new beginning. I took out my phone and looked at my bank account. The refunded $9,600 sat there, a testament to my victory. Combined with the money I had managed to save despite their scheme, I had a real emergency fund for the first time in my life. I was still in debt, but I was no longer drowning. I was on solid ground I had secured for myself. I walked over to the front door and looked at the new keys in my hand. They were plain, standard apartment keys, but they felt substantial, important. I slid the deadbolt into place, the metallic click echoing in the quiet apartment. It was a definitive final sound. It was the sound of security, the sound of autonomy, the sound of my own keys turning in my own lock. The family I thought I had was a casualty of this ordeal, fractured perhaps beyond repair. But in exchange, I had found something far more valuable, my self-respect. And in the quiet of my own home, that was more than enough.